Man, I do not ever get tired of that intro music. It is so good. Um, so anyways, thanks for tuning in. Today we have a really special episode. If you're new here, welcome to the Poor Proles Almanac. My name is Andy. We are a podcast that also occasionally does Twitch stuff that's based around skill sharing. So today is a really special one because it's something that I think is often discussed, but not often actually followed through with in terms of skills and skill building. And I myself am in that group of people that should be doing more of this stuff, and I just don't. And that's around stop the bleed. So today we have a special guest, Carter, a paramedic who has a lot of experience around stop the bleed. So he is going to help us get some basic fundamentals, skills that we should all have. So hopefully you guys got some time to tune in for the whole thing because I think this one's going to really be worth it. So I'm going to bring Carter on right now. How you doing?
Howdy.
How you doing?
Pretty good. Very excited to be here. Long time listener, first time caller.
Awesome. Yeah, that's always fun. It's always different on the other side, right?
Yeah, this is wild. Very excited though. And yeah, I love talking stop the bleed and all of that good stuff. So yeah.
Awesome. So I am like, my skills are pretty bad. I will be blunt. They should be a lot better in this area. It's not something I'm not a good person around. Like, I'm not bad around blood, but I'm not like great around it either. So like, it's definitely something that I've been like, yeah, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna do that, and then I got like basically very little, other than like some basic stitching. That's about as far as I've gone. So I don't have the skills I probably should have. So having us do this is really good for me personally to be like, okay, you're going to learn this thing and you're not going to have an excuse not to do it. So first off, thank you for that. And for I guess I'll ask, could you talk a little bit about your background, like in this industry or field?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started off as a conflict journalist covering mainly domestic stuff in the US and some stuff internationally. And essentially I got really into like media safety. I took a couple of courses on like combat, sort of like combat camera stuff, like being a journalist in a war zone, needing to be able to patch myself or any other journalists or folks up that are around me. And that sort of got me really interested in emergency medicine. And so then um, over the pandemic, I went to or over the course of the pandemic so far, I guess we're still in it. I went to EMT and paramedic school. I've gotten some more advanced training in trauma care, things of that sort. And yeah, that's sort of how I got into it and where I'm at currently. I'm a stop the bleed instructor, which this isn't like a official stop the bleed class, but we're definitely going over everything I would with students. So
Awesome.
yeah,
Great. Yeah, so I'm excited to learn more, and I'm sure, just based on the amount of feedback from people after, some of the incidences in the last couple, let's say last month, I think it became really evident to a lot of people that this is something we need to do more of, and we need to make it as accessible as possible. So I'm really happy to have this and to learn a bunch. So I guess I will hand it off to you, and then I'll just, I guess, ask questions as we go along if I have any questions.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, and for folks that are watching, please don't hesitate to jump in the chats if you have questions or thoughts or anything like that, because that's what it's there for. And there's a bunch of you on, so I definitely would be happy to see folks chime in. So, all right, I'm handing it off to you.
Cool. All right.
That's not you.
So, oh,
There we go.
hi. So yeah, absolutely. Anyone who has any questions, please feel free to ask them. There's no such thing as a dumb question, especially when it comes to like life-saving skills like this. So any questions, please chime away. I can get a little bit in the weeds at times. Um, so I'll try to avoid that. My wife will be coming in at one point to help me sort of like show and demonstrate how you actually use tourniquets, how you use compression bandages, and things of that ilk. So that'll be fun later. But yeah, any questions, please let me know. Like Andy was saying, these skills are definitely needed and are an excellent resource, whether you're, cutting a piece of 4x4 on the farm and the saw slips, or the chainsaw jumps, or if you're in a developing situation like we're seeing over in Ukraine right now, very important to know how to stop the bleed. So we're gonna get started. So there's three major ways to stop a bleed, but they all sort of revolve around this one core concept. And I talk with my hands a lot, so I'm probably going to move my camera here. So those core concepts, it all boils down to direct pressure. So the best way to stop a bleed, any bleed, is direct pressure. And when I say direct pressure, you see in movies a lot, somebody will get a big towel or they'll get a big, hoodie or t-shirt, and they'll just sort of generally put it like this on a wound, which, that's okay, but it's not really going to do much. So direct pressure, like you need sort of to concentrate that, maybe, bind up that towel or that t-shirt and really press it on the wound. And that's the best way to stop bleeding is direct pressure. So tourniquets, compression bandages, and wound packing, which we're not going to get too in the weeds on. We'll sort of go over the basics of it. That all sort of revolves around direct pressure, sort of clenching off those capillaries, arteries, veins, all of that good stuff to keep you from bleeding out. And some of this stuff, I guess, sort of a content warning. I am going to discuss stuff that is, obviously people being injured or hurt, and I'm not going to show anything graphic, but we're going to talk about graphic stuff. So there's a sort of a content warning there. Right out the gate. And so with that, let's talk about one of my favorite pieces of equipment, the tourniquet, which is this bad boy right here. So essentially, I'll go over indications, why you would use it, when you would use it, how to have it set up in your kit, because I'm huge on having your IFAK, your kit squared away. James, I see you got yours, squared away. That's awesome. So like knowing how to have it laid out, and then we'll give a demonstration on how to use it, how you actually use it both on yourself and on someone else. So before we get into all that, there's really two types of bleeds I want to go over. You have your venous bleed and your arterial bleed. So the key differences are a venous bleed is going to be darker blood because it's blood that's deoxygenated, it's under less pressure, and it's blood that's going back to the heart. And so blood from your veins is going to tend to bleed a little bit more slowly. It's going to be darker in color, and you get more of a characteristic ooze rather than a spurt. So it's sort of like cutting open a jelly donut versus a fire hose. You can still bleed out from a venous bleed, so direct pressure is definitely needed, but it's not going to kill you as fast as, say, an arterial bleed, which is the next one we're talking about. So your arterial bleed, that's your bleed where you're having blood that's going out from the heart into the rest of your body. And so you have these massive vessels that have their own sort of, I guess, kind of like a muscular system that are pumping out really hard, really fast. And they're large, right? So they have a lot of blood under a lot of pressure, and it's just continually pumping out. And so if you cut open or have a limb blown off or something, there's a cut in the garden hose, essentially. That blood's going to spurt out. It's going to kind of literally spurt out or bleed out very, very fast. It's going to be bright red more often than not. And it's going to kill you or the metaphorical you, someone else, very, very quickly. If you cut your femoral artery, I think you have less than a minute. And that's really the big one that we always talk about is the femoral artery, which is sort of in your upper thigh area. And so with that, the best way to stop those bleeds on an extremity is going to be your tourniquet. So I have here, and Andy, might going too fast?
Nope, you're going great.
Awesome. And again, any questions, please toss them in the chat. So what I have here is a combat action tourniquet. So these have a few key components. Let me take this apart real quick here. So you have your buckle, you have your strap, so that goes in there. And then up here, you have your windlass. This is what you crank down once your tourniquet's on nice and tight, and that's going to go into a clip here. And then I've never heard a proper name for this. I just call it like the time strap or the band. This piece of Velcro right here, then once everything's tied down, cinched, hunky dory, is going to go across here to keep any extra of your band and keep your windlass in place and squared away. And it says time on there for a very important reason. That's because time is muscle, essentially. And when you cut off all blood flow to an extremity, you're sort of on a ticking time clock. Now, it's not as bad as people said in the 80s and 90s, where it's like if you put a tourniquet on, that person's going to lose their limb. That's not the case anymore. There have been some cases that I've heard of from other trauma providers, trauma care providers, where they did a study, I want to say it was 2008, 2006, casualty in Afghanistan, an American soldier essentially had a tourniquet on from time of injury all the way to the hospital in Germany, and they were able to save the limb, or at least the vast majority of it, even with the tourniquet on. So that's why, we have the time there, so we know how long the tourniquet's been on. So we know if we need to leave it in place, and if the trauma team at the hospital or wherever knows they need to leave it in place, how long it's been on, if the limb's salvageable, things of that sort. Usually we say about 3 to 4 hours is sort of the window for tourniquets now. That's why you put the time there. And if you don't have a marker or Sharpie or something to write time, at the very least, what you can do is a little gruesome, but a little drop of blood on your gloved hand, because we always wear gloves, right? Keeping things safe. A little drop of blood, put a T, like some sort of horrific Ash Wednesday, on their forehead. So that way, any other medical personnel are going to know that there's a tourniquet placed somewhere on the patient if it's not immediately obvious where it is. And so with that, let's talk about, so we've talked about the parts of the tourniquet. Let's talk about layout. Yeah, James, obviously you don't take it off, but the trauma surgeon in the hospital, the care team that's in the hospital, will eventually be removing it and things of that sort. And it's important to know how long it's been on. So you're absolutely right. It's staying on. Don't ever take it off. If the bleeding stops, that's good. Tourniquet's doing its job. Leave it on. And so let's talk about layout. So the scenario that I always give students, and that was given to me because I didn't know this when I first started getting into all of this, is that your tourniquet's going to come pretty tightly wound, tightly packed in a cellophane package. And we're going to talk about how tight the tourniquet needs to be in just a second. So we're absolutely going to get to that. But it's going to come like this. I highly recommend taking it out of that cellophane because blood is really slippery and really gross. And so if you have your gloved hands, or even if you don't have gloves on and you're trying to tear through a really tightly, airtight cellophane package, you're not going to have a good time, and you're going to be losing blood, or they're going to be losing blood. And every second counts, especially if you're putting on a tourniquet. So what I always tell folks is we have it out all the way. All components are undone. And you'll see that I put this time band over itself on the clip there, so it's out of the way of the windlass, out of the way of the clip and everything, so there's no risk of it getting caught until we need it to catch. So then you're going to take your tourniquet, smooth side facing towards the inside. And you're going to feed this end through your buckle. And so once you have it through, you have a loop made. You're going to go up to the top here with this bit, put just a little fold in there so it gives you a little bit extra something to grab onto. And then you're going to fold part of the tourniquet onto itself like that. Now, we really don't want much of the Velcro touching each other because that's just more of a hassle to get undone. We want rapid application of the tourniquet. So what you're going to do is you have smooth side and smooth side. You're going to fold that down on top of there. So you see we folded this down so it's on Velcro. And your remaining Velcro on this side, I'm going to fold over that. So only a little bit of Velcro is touching. It's very neat. Everything is out where we need it to be. And what I do is for my kit, my IFAC, I leave a tourniquet on the outside of it with just a hair tie around it. So that way, if I really need to, I can just rip it off, rip it out of the hair tie. Strong rubber bands work as well. Obviously, don't use one that's been in the junk drawer for 20 years because it's just going to break on you. But make sure your stuff's secure but accessible. And that's sort of how I keep that. And the reason I do that is so then let's say if my arm is injured, I can open it up like this. I have it. Put my arm through our loop that's already made. It goes up here, and I can then tighten it down like that, one-handed, access my windlass, which is very tight, and then throw any extra of this band over top and throw that over top. So that was one-handed application. Essentially just flick of the wrist, up the arm, tighten and crank. So I'll talk about tightness in a second, but I also want to talk about placement. So if you're ever in a situation where you need to place a tourniquet, odds are it's a pretty bad situation that you're in. And so there's two schools of placement. There's a few inches above the wound, essentially length of your hand above the wound. Let's say I got injured here, I'd put it up here somewhere. And there's the high and tight school of thought. So I'd say if you're in a situation where you need to put on a tourniquet, it's a pretty bad situation. I'd go high and tight. We're really worried about getting this on as quick as possible, getting it cinched down and getting it squared away as quick and efficiently as possible. And sort of, if I'm down here and I'm putting it on, is it still going to stop the bleeding? Yes. But for the sake of making sure that bleeding is going to be, cut off and this is on quickly, especially if you're in a situation like they're having in the Ukraine where it's sort of a dynamic situation, a lot of things are happening at once, or even on the farm and you're, all alone out in the lumberyard or wherever, getting this on and getting it up here and then just, hitting it down, that's going to be your best bet. And so in slow-mo, essentially, I get my tourniquet undone, I'm grabbing it, I have my loop, this is going up the arm, high and tight, high as I can go, sort of into the armpit. And I want my windlass to be facing out away from my armpit, because if it's in here and I'm trying to turn, I'm getting caught in the armpit. I'm getting caught under the arm, and that's no good. So sort of out, little area where you're going to be able to get it all nice and secure. Cranking it down, all that good stuff. But before you crank your windlass down, you need to tighten it, which I did not do. So make sure you tighten it. So when you tighten it, essentially, this is the most important part of the tourniquet. People think the windlass is, but this is. You need to crank this strap down as tight as humanly possible. And I really can't stress that enough. This needs to be tight as possible, because it's the same concept with ratchet straps on your, if you're tying something down. Let's say, you sort of do this, your ratchet strap kind of loose, and then you're trying to ratchet down. It's going to stay loose. There's going to be a lot of slack, and you're going to lose that hay you just paid $6 for, because hay prices are ridiculous right now. I promise I won't make so many farm references, but it's Poor Pro's Almanac, and I farm too, so it's a fun time.
I approve of it. It's fun.
Andy approves of it, chat, so we're all good.
It's over. Yeah. Yeah. So this has been great. So when you say high, could you clarify a little bit of what that means? Does that mean like at the beginning of the extremity?
Yeah. So high and tight. High means you're going up here on. Me too, Chad. Me too. So you're going up here as high as you can on the extremity. So if I'm wounded down here, or even if I'm wounded here, I'm still going high up on the extremity, right where the extremity starts, like you were talking about, cranking that down to the point where it hurts, because none of this is going to feel good for your patient, for lack of a better term. They're your patient, or it's you, and it's going to suck and it's going to really hurt, but it's going to save their life, and that's the important thing. But yeah, high means highest possible in the extremity. Obviously, not in the, you know, shoulder up here. You're not going up here, but on the extremity as high as possible. Like I was saying, tight as possible on here. You really should only need, ow, ow, one or two turns on the tourniquet to get that to cut off circulation. And so people were asking, how tight do we do it? Tight as humanly possible. And the two metrics you're looking to know that your tourniquet is tight enough is one, down here, or below the extremity. You can go under the knee, or if you're really experiencing where the pulse is, check the foot. See if they have a pulse. And if they have a pulse in that extremity, tourniquet's not on tight enough, tighten that down more. Or you may need, if they're a larger person, such as myself, a second tourniquet. Because the larger the extremity, the more pressure you need, and sometimes one tourniquet just won't cut it. So that's the one metric. If you know where to find pulses and you're good at it, more power to you. More obvious though, has the bleeding stopped? Has the bleeding, like your arterial bleed or your really bad veins, has it completely stopped? And if it has, congrats, your tourniquet's tight enough. If not, needs to be on a lot tighter, using the methods we talked about. One more thing about tourniquets before anybody has any questions is never put it on a joint. So never put a tourniquet on a wrist, on a hand, on an elbow, on a knee, on an ankle. They're not, they won't work there. One, because it moves, right? This rotates, so it's might not stay on there properly. And also there's really not enough to really grab there. And it's at a weird angle, so you're not going to get the tightness you need to cut off circulation. Should go without saying, but I had a student one time ask me, no, you cannot put a tourniquet on someone's neck. They will die.
Yeah.
Great question. Matthew, if you need to put on more than one, how does that affect placement? Let me grab another tourniquet and I'll show you. So this is another one of my training tourniquets. So essentially what you're going to do is you have your tourniquet up here, and you're just going to go right below that one. Try and keep them in line if possible. Go right below that one, close as you can. Tighten down again. Crank this again, and once that's done and done, those are in. Mark the time of each. Can you all see that? So about as close as possible as you can to the other one that you had already placed. Never put a tourniquet below the injury. That's not going to do anything. You need to go above the injury, because we're trying to stop blood from flowing to the injury. If you put a tourniquet below, blood's still going to flow to the injury, and it's going to be bad news bears. I have one more point on tourniquets if we're good on time. I know I talk a lot about them, but it's really the most important piece of kit we have. Knockoffs. So many knockoffs out there. It's terrible. I hate them. And in the area where I work, when we do certain trainings involving schools or involving, like mass casualty situations, we work with certain members of law enforcement. And so we'll look at the members of law enforcement. We'll check their kit, their plate carrier, whatnot, and we'll look at their tourniquets. We'll be like, hey, let me see that real quick. And I'll look at it, and it's a knockoff, so we take it from them. Obviously, because we need to make sure everyone has tourniquets. We give them one of the ones we have that are actually sort of hashtag licensed tourniquet. But yeah, I'm going to talk about that real quick. Different types of tourniquets.
Can I ask real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
So obviously you've got the knockoff issues. Is there an issue with the age of a tourniquet?
I haven't found one, and really don't remember seeing expiration dates. Let me check this one real quick. Combat app tourniquet. That's something I've really never really thought about. I mean, practice due diligence. I would sort of treat them like a plate carrier, or like plates. You know, they have an expiration date um, to where they're sort of their peak effectiveness, and after that goes down. I'd say if you've had a tourniquet on your kit for like 3 or 4 years, and it's been exposed to the elements, it's been in hot, cold, sunlight, all that fun, funky stuff, replace it. Excuse me, because it's a tool and tools can get worn down. Um, yeah, so uh, that reminds me, this is a practice tourniquet. This is the same thing, just this one's bright orange. There's not a single tourniquet in my kit that I've ever used. If you're going to have a practice tourniquet, which I strongly recommend you get one, don't use it for field application because your windlass here, you can see this one's pretty stretched out already, looking pretty well used. And there's no guarantee on effectiveness after that point. Once you've really tightened it down all the way, there's no guarantee that's going to tighten down all the way again or be reliable again. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and they're not super expensive. I mean, they're not like wicked cheap, but it's not like if you can afford all the other things like, the firearms that you're being concerned about, then you can afford a tourniquet.
yeah, exactly. I sort of preach a gospel of you really should never have to improvise a tourniquet. You should always have one. Um, there are studies that show that some improvised tourniquets are more effective than others, but really your best bet is just having a tourniquet on hand. Um, so tourniquets, cat tourniquets, $30. I know that's steep for some of us, especially if you're paid bi-weekly and it's towards the middle of that and you're low on funds. I completely understand that. I find myself there often, but really I can't stress enough how important it is to buy sort of like brand name, right? Brand name medical supplies, tourniquets, compression bandages, gauze, like combat gauze, pressure gauze, and things of that ilk. Because at this point, it's your life or it's someone else's life. These products are given rigorous testing. I'm not sponsored or anything. It's just part of the course I teach. We know that these work. If you have a knockoff such as this, that's $10 on Amazon. I mean, there's no guarantee it's going to work. I know you can't see because it's where you can't feel it, but the plastic here is so much more durable than the plastic here. Like, this is very cheap knockoff, very thin. I could break this with my hands right now if I wanted to with very little pressure. Um, yeah. Don't buy knockoffs. Don't buy anything off Amazon. Not that we want to shop there anyway. Um, North American Rescue, Rescue Essentials, Gorilla Tacticals, they all have full IFAKs, individual first aid kits that have tourniquets, or if you want to buy tourniquets separately. I always recommend the CAT, Combat Application Tourniquet, tried and true. There's the Soft T that comes with a metal clip and a sort of a ratchet instead of just this style. Um, I wouldn't recommend anyone that's just an elastic band just because they're not as effective. You really want to have sort of that mechanical, can crank it down. And that's about all I have to say about tourniquets. I know, Adam, you asked if you don't have access to a legit tourniquet, what's the best way to improvise one? I mean, you can improvise them, but again, really, you should have a tourniquet, a belt with a stick put through it where you're cranking it down, a kerchief, or like really big, like Boy Scout kerchief, handkerchief that you put a stick in, you crank it down, then tie that down. Those can work, but in the time it takes you to find a stick or object to do it, get your belt off, get the belt around, or get that kerchief, get it around, get it tied down and everything, the person's losing a lot of blood. And really, you could have saved all that trouble. Not you specifically, Adam. I'm sure you're great and you already have a tourniquet, but you know, you could have just had one of these and got it on in like 10 seconds or less. So yeah. that's more or less my sermon on tourniquets.
Cool. Could you speak to, I don't know if you saw the question about, I know you'd mentioned like putting some blood on someone's forehead so that they knew there was a tourniquet there if you didn't have a pen. But is there anything else, like once the bleeding is managed, I mean, it sounds like when it's tightened, it should be theoretically managed just basically at that point. Um, but if not, is it important to measure the difference between when you started applying the tourniquet versus when the bleeding stopped itself?
Like measuring like how many cranks it took, or like what measuring what exactly?
Yeah, so I'm trying to phrase the question
Where was the
that it's
question? Is it
big.
the sorry I joined late?
Yeah,
Yeah, I was taught to immediately write the time when the tourniquet was applied on the person's forehead and sharp spoons. Yeah, that is important. So yeah, you write down the time, making sure it wasn't that it's not on too long, because obviously then you're looking at cell death and sort of toxic buildup in the muscles and things in the extremity below the tourniquet that can result in someone losing the limb. But like I said, 3 to 4 hours is kind of the window we're looking at. Modern day, obviously, there's cases when it can be on longer, but yeah, tourniquet management. Actually, that's a really good point, Andy. Is once it's on, obviously, you need to move the patient, or they need to get to a safer area themselves, or you need to get to a safer area. So you always want to reassess and make sure that it's on properly. So if it's all right, I'll have my wife come in for a moment, and I'll show you how to put one on another person. Because I kind of already showed how to put one on our on your own. If that's okay with
sure.
you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's
Right.
do it.
Right. I'll text her because she's wrangling puppies right now. We just got two Texas healers for the farm, and
Ooh,
they're crazy.
yeah, puppies tend to be. Uh,
Um, while she's making her way up, does anyone have any other questions about tourniquets or tourniquet application, things of that ilk?
and while people are thinking about their questions, I will plug what's at the bottom of the screen, which is if you're enjoying and appreciating this information, shoot a couple bucks over to our Venmo and we'll get it over to Carter for his time and helping us all be more prepared for what may or may not happen and hopefully doesn't happen. But if it does, we will be more prepared and capable. So if you want to throw a couple bucks, hit us up on Venmo, Poor Proles Almanac, and we'll get it over to Carter.
And I really appreciate that, folks, and the support, and for everyone being here. I mean, the fact that you're here alone just shows your dedication to being able to be more self sufficient and help out your fellow compatriots and things of that sort. Read the abdominal question. I understand you should never never put a tourniquet on the abdomen. Tourniquets are strictly for extremity only. Um, Only on the extremities, never on the neck, head, abdomen, chest, none of that. Extremities only, arms and legs. Um, and with that, this is Sarah.
Hello. Hi.
And hi. Oh, that's our dog.
The puppies came too.
Yep.
He has opinions.
He's a big fan of the show too. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So we'll show how to put a tourniquet on another person. I'm just going to demonstrate arms, legs. It's the same concept. It's just, on a leg.
Yeah.
Again, never put on a knee or an ankle. But so let's say that Sarah's injured in her arm. There was a piece of shrapnel that nicked an artery or a gunshot wound, like we saw with some of the stuff that happened over the past couple of years with various demonstrations, uprisings, and riots. So the injury's here, middle of the arm, spurting blood. The first thing that I want to do is get direct pressure on that in the form of a gloved hand. Obviously, gloves aren't always going to be available, but if you can wear gloves, please try to, because blood's really gross. So direct pressure. If I have it available to me, grab my tourniquet, have a compatriot grab my tourniquet, or worst case scenario, let go for a second and get your kit. Obviously, this is undone, so I'll redo it. Um, but let's say, because this is where I keep my tourniquet, I keep mine here on my kit. So I have direct pressure here. I get my tourniquet out. I know it's needed because there's blood spurting everywhere. We're in a safe area. We're not taking any fire. We're not, there's not bombs dropping or bottles being thrown. And if there are, we need to move to a safe location or as safe as we can, because there's no point in getting injured as well, because then you're another casualty and you can't render care to someone. So your safety and your patient's safety has to be really important, critical actually, before you can render any care. So let's say we're not dealing with any of that fun, funky stuff. I have direct pressure here on the wound, and I have my tourniquet. So tourniquet's open. I have my, it's already looped. I'm going to put this up on the wound. I'm going to let go. I'm going to get up to here, sort of the armpit. I'm going to crank this down. I apologize in advance. Crank that down best I can. This is going to get wrapped around after I'm done putting the windlass tight. So let's say, it takes 2 turns. I'm going to do one, right? All right. So we have this turned down. It's nice and tight. I look down here, right? Bleeding stopped. No longer bleeding. If you're trained to, you know where you're looking. Check for a pulse. No pulse. This is wrapped tight enough. This is going to go over top your windlass here, over top our Velcro patch here on our clip. Time band's going over top of it. I'm writing my time. I have my Sharpie, or a little bit of blood. I have a T, and I have the time. So that's all set with that. No other injuries to worry about at this time. We just got that managed. And so we're going to move to an even safer location, get more advanced help, and we're going to monitor this. So how we monitor this is, we make sure the windlass hasn't come loose. We make sure that this is still really tight. We make sure we're not having any bleeding. We check for a pulse scan, no pulse, all that good stuff. I'm going to loosen this so I don't have to sleep on the couch tonight. And that's how you put it on another person. And essentially, as everybody saw with me, it's just the reverse, or similar with you on your own. Goes up on the arm, cranking around, tighten, and all that good stuff. One last point, and I promise it's the last one on tourniquet use, is you see in movies, especially war movies, they go in, they dive on their buddy, they stick their knee in the groin or in the arm, like armpit, shoulder area. Please don't do that. That's terrible for your patient. You have a lot of big vessels, both veins and arteries, that run through here and here. And if you grind the weight of your human body via your knee into that area, not only can you cause injury, but if they have other injuries you can't tell, like internal bleeding or broken bones, that's going to grind it and make it a million times worse for them and make their injuries worse and lower their chances of survival. So please don't drop a knee, as it's called. Just put direct pressure on the wound area. If you have another person, have them put direct pressure while you get that tourniquet ready. Tourniquet shorty, be ready while you get the tourniquet out. So that's tourniquets. Thanks, honey.
You're welcome.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. That was great. So I've got a question for you. You brought up the idea that like the Amazon ones are cheap and whatever. Would it make sense to buy one as like a training one?
Yeah, I see some people do that.
Because you don't care if it gets destroyed anyway. It's like $10. Who cares?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I'd say, yeah, you could buy one online, cheap, $10, train with it. Just know that the legit one that you have in your kit's going to feel a little bit different. I think somebody mentioned that, these are a bit thicker, a little bit more sturdy material, but the core concepts are the same. I train with them. When I do a class, I give them some cheap tourniquets to try out. Just so long as you know that A, once the tourniquet's used for training, you can't use it on a person. And B, that tourniquet should not be used on a person because it's a cheap knockoff. So yeah, that's a good point.
And someone asked about elevating the limb.
So that doesn't really work as well as it should. If you have just like a really superficial cut, on your arm and you're just putting a piece of gauze on there, and that stops the bleeding, and you just have them hold their arm up a little bit, that's fine. But if a major vessel is really bleeding profusely, you can have your arm raised all the way up in the air, and it's really not gonna do what you need it to do. How to fold a tourniquet again? Yes, absolutely will in a second. When should we apply a tourniquet? Stop gauze first. So that's a really good question. That's sort of up to your judgment. I'd say if you see someone in a big old pool of blood, or you see blood spurting out of their leg, their arm, anything of that sort, just go straight for the tourniquet. We had a patient where I work a little while ago where they put on, I want to say, 4 or 5 gauze pads and 6 gauze wraps, and it still bled through, and then they went for the tourniquet. And that's no fault of their own. It was working for, at the time, but then it still ended up bleeding through because there ended up being some arterial involvement. So they didn't do anything wrong, but they could have gone for the tourniquet first. Um, so I'm a big proponent of tourniquet first. Ask questions later. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of something you mentioned earlier is that like there is a longer window to save the limb when you use a tourniquet than I think people think. And I think a lot of folks, their first thought is, I don't want to lose this limb. So they're like, maybe I can just like pat it until it'll stop it. But the tourniquet will definitely do the job. So um, there should be less hesitancy in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of it's education. People still think, from the old 80s, 90s, or they see movies where they put that tourniquet on, that arm or leg is going to be gone. And that's just not the case anymore. So again, everyone who's coming to the stream tonight, thank you for being here and for, learning. Compartment syndrome is better than death anyway. Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
Um,
Denial is a thing, though, unfortunately, for a lot of folks.
yeah. Tourniquets are not used in internal bleeding. There is nothing that you can do for someone who has internal bleeding. There's very little that I can do as a paramedic for internal bleeding. I can give a couple little medications and get them to the hospital and do all my fun medic stuff. But really, the only cure for internal bleeding and really any of these traumas we're talking about, in any long-term sense, is surgery. Trauma is cured by surgery, and evidence-based medicine, which is tourniquet application in part. Um, with that, if everyone's good on tourniquets, Andy, we could talk compression bandages if you'd like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. I don't want to take up too much of the stream or.
We're here as long as you need us, or you have stuff for us.
All right, fair enough. So if y'all are still good, we'll talk on compression bandages. If everyone's good, chat. Yep, cool. All right, no objections. All right, I'm gonna stop stalling. Yeah, James, scoop and run. So yeah, definitely. If you're in like I said, sort of those developing situations, which is my PC fun way of saying getting shot at and bombed and tear gassed, you need to get out of there because you can't do anything for anyone if you yourself are hurt, injured, or incapacitated. So you got boot, scoot, and boogie. If you can run and put a tourniquet on someone at the same time, that's awesome. But really, just get out of that bad situation, and then render care. Obviously, if somebody's leg's blown off, you can only do so much. Excuse me. But please make sure that you don't yourself die or get seriously injured trying to, you know, essentially get in and grab someone, as hard as that is to say, your safety is number one. That's why it's an individual first aid kit. Like this first aid kit that you keep on you is for you, so someone can render care to you. You're not, or at least most of you, I assume, are not, medics going out into, scoop someone up. But yeah, that was a tangent. But
No, it never occurred to me that makes a lot of sense that it's an individual first aid kit, and we always think of using it because someone gets hurt, not because it's for somebody who can help us when we are hurt.
Yeah. The first aid kit that you keep on you is for you. Now, if you want to keep extra goodies in the rest of your kit, that is perfectly good, cool, and hip, as you should. But the IFAC is for you. That is so someone like me or another one person who's trained in stop bleed, like everyone here, is in a safe situation and can render care to you. So they open that up and they apply your first aid kit to yourself. Lane obviously knows some like EMT stuff with the body substance isolation. That's wearing your gloves and you're seen safe. Um, yeah, so that's scene safety. You can't take care of somebody if you yourself are shot. So don't get in a situation where you're going to get shot if you're trying to help take care of folks.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Don't need more bodies.
Yep. All right. So compression bandages. If everyone's good.
Think we're good.
All right. Also, I just realized you and I are both wearing very similar flannels. That's awesome.
It's that time of year. It's flannel season.
Perfect. Like every season except July and August, you know?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, basically. I
Yeah.
still can't do the short sleeve flannel. Can't do it. Doesn't feel right.
Patently refuse. If the sleeves aren't cuffed or rolled down, it's not a flannel. It's sparkling plaid.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
fair. I like it.
Yeah. And that's fashion tips with Carter and Andy, the new show on the Poor Pros Network.
Yeah, there you go. It's coming. Watch out.
Yeah.
It's going to be a bunch of bad advice.
Oh, it's gonna be terrible. Yeah. But yeah. Back to serious fun fashion matters. Now we're going to talk about compression bandages. There are essentially really just two components to the compression bandage. Compression, which is your ace wrap, right? That's essentially what this is a really fun, fancy olive drab, stretch wrap. And wrapped inside that, wrapped in plastic, is your gauze pad. So your compression bandage is going to be for that wound that really might not need a tourniquet, but it's pretty gnarly and it's bleeding, and you need to get that bleeding under control. So, keeping in mind the doctrine of direct pressure, you're gonna open up your bandage, which real quick about bandage packaging, it obviously comes in like a plastic wrap, sealed. I forget who it was. It was either Kalishnikoving or Yellow Peril Tactical or someone else. If you know who it is, shout them out. They put like you put on floors like the wrap so it's non-slip, like non-slip wrap, the little like tar paper. They put it on the ends where you're supposed to tear off. So even if you have gunk and blood and stuff on your hands, you can still tear them open. And I'm about to do that with my kit this week when I have time. So that's a great tip from those folks. Shout out to um, Yellow Peril and Army Friends, and all those folks. Kalishnikoving.
Yeah,
Not
it gets
sponsored.
shared. All of that stuff gets shared by all of them. So I'm not sure which one it was.
Yeah, like they
Uh,
all they all have their own little like their own social media network within social media, which is awesome. But gauze, right? Back to this. Sorry, the ADHD is real today. Um, so you have your arm or your leg or your neck, your head, your abdomen, and your back. Pretty much everything except your chest, right? So this is wide array of applications. Um, I'm probably going to bother Sarah and have her come back up here for this, but I'll use my arm for now. So you have your wound. Let's say it's right here. Got cut by a piece of glass, or whatever. There was a rusty T-post that decided to exact its revenge. I have a bad cut on my arm now. So I'm going to take this. I'm going to open it up, and this is sterile. So we don't want to add any more germs uh, to the wound, right? We want to try and keep it as clean as possible. So keep this out of the dirt. This is going to go on top of the wound. So it's on top of the wound. And there's a little band here, or a little loop, kind of like your tourniquet. See there? This is going to have the other end looped through it. and some of them come with it, some of it don't. So I'm not talking too much about it. Some of them have this little alligator clip on the other end, a little plastic stick. Not all of them have it, so I don't harp too much on that. I'm just going to take your other end. Once this is on, I'm going to thread it through here. So a little movie magic for a second. So that's threaded through. I have my direct pressure going. I'm closing this down. And so I have this on. We're looped through, and I'm really cranking this down to get that on there as tight as possible. So that's on there now. And now I'm going to take the rest of my ace wrap and essentially about 3 fingers on either side of the wound, I'm going to bandage. And I'm going to go in the middle as well. So I'm here. I'm in the middle. And I'm on the other side. And this is a lot harder to do on your own than it is a tourniquet. So that's why it helps to have everybody in your friend group trained in this stuff. And then middle again, and so on and so forth. I'm just going to do a quick wrap until it's all super tight. There's no bleeding, right? No blood's coming through, soaking this. If it is, tourniquet. Get that nice and tight, wrap it around. Now, it's either going to have one of these clips. So then you just clip that in on both ends on wrap that's already laid down, like so. Or sort of just tie it in through one of your previous wraps. So you're essentially just going to tie a knot in that so it stays in place. Now, I know I showed you on my arm, but we'll see if Sarah can come back. I'll show you how to put her on someone's abdomen here in a second. But yeah, cover the wound, on tight. Again, I keep preaching it. Direct pressure on there. You're going to keep as much pressure on there as possible till you go to tighten it down. What that pressure is doing is it's essentially forcing blood from oozing out. Blood's going to sort of start to be able to more collect there, especially in the little capillaries. It's going to help enhance your clotting factor, more or less. Essentially, it's just going to keep your blood from spilling out, and it's going to help your blood stay in there. For all this stuff, should you cut off clothes? My effect is bare bones. That's a good point that I didn't really cover. I'd say if you have trauma shears, or if you can get them, you can buy 2 packs for $10 on Amazon or other websites, and keep a pair in there. Just because you can use them for a million different things, not just cutting through clothes. Obviously, that's what I use my trauma shears for. But I also use it to cut tape and bandages and all sorts of other stuff. And so long as it stays clean and in your kit, you can use it for other applications. In terms of cutting through clothes, it sort of depends on how dynamic a situation is. If I have a bleed here and I had my sleeve rolled down and I'm not, spurting out completely soaked, yeah, I'll absolutely cut through that. I'm rolling it up now just because this is my favorite shirt, but if it wasn't, I would cut through. And yeah, trauma shears, $2 to $10. You don't need anything fancy, just real bare bones. Cuts through at an angle with a blunt tip, and you're set to go. Yeah, cut through. But if it's like, let's say, a more dynamic situation, a gunshot wound, just tear it open. Tear open the shirt, the pant leg, the sleeve. Tear it open. Expose the wound the best you can. Because you need to know where they're bleeding from to be able to control their bleeding. So yeah, expose it, find it, there it is, pressure, then tourniquet, gauze, whichever. Someone has to use compression gauze after tourniquet. It depends if you want to expend those resources. So if you're in a resource-rich environment, like let's say you're like at the Boston Marathon, for example, or wherever, and there's going to be a bunch of whoever there, medical personnel that have a bunch of equipment, and you put a tourniquet on and that bleeding stopped, and then they want to put on a compression bandage on that, or you have like 3 on hand and you can, cinch that down, put it on. Sure, technically the bleeding's already stopped, and that's our main concern. The wound was already infected when it was penetrated by foreign objects, debris, shrapnel, bullets, things of that sort. And so you're not really preventing anything there. My train of thought is we're in a resource scarce environment, and if the tourniquet has done the job of stopping the bleeding to the extremity, and we're not having any more bleeding coming out of the area, um, I'd say leave it off for the time being, and if you need to reassess and it turns out you need one there, then put one on. But I personally, and again, all opinions are my own when I say things like this, I wouldn't put one on, because if the tourniquet did its job right, then you don't need to use one of these to stop any of the bleeding there. So no pressure, bandage, compression, and the tourniquet in that order. Yeah, essentially you go from not having anything to exposing, and you have direct pressure, and then you have your pressure bandage if you're using your pressure bandage, or your tourniquet if you're using your tourniquet. Yeah. Does that make sense, chat, Andy, what I just said there?
Makes sense to me.
Okay. Again, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to share. I'm obviously not the end all be all expert on any of this. There's a lot of great folks, a lot of great resources out there, especially on Instagram. St. Fisher Church of Evidence-Based Medicine, the Resuscitationist, North American Rescue, all those folks post fantastic evidence-based articles and tidbits on trauma care. We're just going over real basic, you have an IFAC and you're using it type stuff.
Yeah, I think the bare minimum that people should know.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So with that, I'll have Sarah come. We'll show how to put it on an abdominal wound if that works for you.
Sure. And while we're waiting for her, I guess I'll ask a couple of questions.
Absolutely.
So we had talked about like with the tourniquet that you should buy a specific or like certain quality brands. Does that apply here as well?
Uh, yes. So, these bandages, I'd say sort of the same folks you're going to get from your tourniquet from North American Rescue, Rescue Essentials, Gorilla Tactical. They all also sell sort of these brand name gauzes. I think Combat Gauze is a good one, a pressure gauze, things of that sort. I actually have a combat gauze that will show for wound packing here in a little bit. Things of that ilk. Also, look at reviews. If something has been bought and there's like 50 GWAT veterans and firefighters and medics and doctors that say, "Oh, this product's fantastic," I'd say, go with that one, and things of that sort. But if someone has 2 reviews on Amazon from just folks who are like, "Oh yeah, I got scratched by my cat and I put this on and boy did it stop that bleeding," you might want to stray away from that one.
Yeah.
On Live Like the World is Dying, to talk about using the article. So with that, with using Yarrow, I'm reading a really interesting book right now called Green Beret Medic or Field Medic. Green Beret's Guide to Field Medicine, that involves herbal remedies, poultices, and whatnot for extended care in sort of austere environments. And austere environments are places where you're not going to have access to resources and things of that sort. And I'd say, unless you have training in that, unless you're very experienced in that, don't do it. Don't get involved in that, because if you don't do it right, then you're adding even more contaminants to a wound that's already infected, and it could just make a bad situation that much worse. If your compression gauze is dirty, would you put something in between or underneath? Like I said, keep it sanitary. You're already dealing with a wound that's going to have some infection. Now, if you are trying to put this on and you fumble and it drops and it's on concrete and it lands face up like this, Yeah, go ahead and use it. It was a 5 second rule. But if you have like dirt or, sewage, whatever on this thing, please don't put that on a wound because sepsis is, sort of a systemic infection and that'll kill you just as dead as as massive hemorrhage. So like Lane was saying, it needs to be clean. And yeah, once you get to a hospital, once you get to someplace, the wound is going to be cleaned and they're going to put them on a metric hecton of antibiotics. So, um, Sarah's back. If we can show this application with abdominal wounds,
Yep. I'll get out of the way.
try and turn the light on. Oh, my lamp isn't plugged in. That'd be helpful. Oh, we have our mascots here. Hold on. Tori, come here. Real quick, I know we're talking very important stuff, but look at how cute this dog is. Right?
Hi, puppy.
Right?
Hi. Not getting any attention. I see how it is.
Yeah, she's picky. She has a twin sister, so she has a chip on her shoulder. Yeah. But my lovely wife is back. So abdominal wounds, we'll just
Yeah. Here. Do you want my cardigan off?
yeah, we'll take.
Okay.
Yeah, just so like we'll leave the tank top on. So with abdominal wounds, you have a couple different types. Obviously, your penetrating trauma. We're only talking about sort of the sort of penetrating trauma. Your shrapnel, your debris, your laceration, cuts, gunshot wounds, things of that ilk. Blunt trauma is its own ball field, and really the only solution for that is surgery, especially with that surgery. Here we can at least stop the bleeding. Blunt trauma, we can't really do anything. We're talking abdominal wounds. So obviously, we've all seen in movies. I know I keep referencing movies. I was a film major before I got into everything that I ended up getting into. But you see in movies, right? The guy holding a pot to keep his guts in, or they're laid out and they have spaghetti noodles all over their stomach because it was a cheap B horror film, and those are the best films. We're not going to do anything with those. Please don't try and push them back in because that can just make a bad situation worse, get them tangled and all that stuff. Now, obviously, if you're really trained in it, you have an experience in it, the tactical casualty combat care guidelines, which I treat like holy script, says a little bit differently. But for us, just being regular folks out there with an IFAC and extra kit for someone trying to make a difference in the world, don't shove guts back into someone. What you can do is, let's say there's an abdominal wound here on the person. If guts are out, put clean, moist gauze. Never mind. That's for if I have access to like saline and whatnot. For you, I don't know if you're carrying saline in your IFAC. You probably shouldn't. Just put a clean, dry dressing. Clean gauze, sterile gauze from your kit here on the wound, and then your combat gauze, or your combat bandage, I should say. So that's for abdominal eviscerations when guts are spilling out. Really don't do much more than that. But let's say bleeding, gunshot wound, let's say bullet went in here and came out here. What we're going to do is we're going to put one bandage on here. So we have our bandage on, we're applying pressure, we're wrapping our bandage around, we're becoming really comfortable with the person we're taking care of for a second. We're keeping that on, stretching our bandage around until we get to here, feeding it through here, the loop we talked about earlier. Pulling that super tight, and you want this to try and stay wide so that you get better compression. Pull that super tight so it's tight as possible on the wound. And then we're just going to wrap super tight around there. So we're obviously pulling this way, and the bandage is going that way. So to keep our tension, we want to wrap back around this way on our patient. And again, trying to keep the bandage wide so we have better compression and better wound sealing because we don't want dirt and stuff to get in there. Wrapping around here, back round, wrapping around down here until we run out of gauze, run out of bandaging. So turn this side, and then we're going to clip it in place. So thank you. So that's sealed up there, but we had a wound over here. So what are we going to do with that wound? So if we can, before we start wrapping, if we have another bandage or a big honking piece of gauze, do I have any? I have another bandage. So let's say we have another bandage. We could double wrap it, obviously, but if you just have one of these, just a big gauze, we call them abdominal pads, which I highly recommend using. I'll actually break down my IFAC for you if you'd like in a second. Gauze there, and as you're wrapping, just wrap over top the existing gauze. I know I didn't show that, but that's a fun tip to make sure both wounds are cared for. And if, let's say, blood's still coming out of here, what we're going to do is we're going to get another bandage, another compression bandage. Right over top. We're not taking anything off because if you take that off and there were clots forming, scabs forming there, right, and we rip that off, we've just opened up the wound like when we first got there. So always add, never subtract. Sorry, honey.
No, you're good.
So slap that on and just wrap around again super tight. As many times as necessary to get the bleeding to stop. Oh, get this off here.
Okay.
So that's abdominal placement. Show you neck placement too. I know I'm going fast. I spent a lot of time on tourniquets just because that's sort of like the most critical, tool, critical bleed. But these are also very important. So if you have any questions, please leave them in the chat, or Andy, if you have anything you want to add or any questions, please.
Doing great. I do have a question though. It's kind of peripheral, but you've been using these now with these compression bandages. Can you like reuse the ones that you're using right now, for example, or is it similar to like tourniquets where it's like once they've been stretched out, you don't want to be using them in a real life situation?
So I wouldn't use these in a real life situation, not so much because they've been stretched out, but just because these have been sitting in a cardboard box that I use when I take to trainings, and have been getting all sorts of microbacteria and organisms on them. And so I wouldn't trust that this wouldn't, severely infect someone that, is exposed to it. Now, obviously, if we're in the middle of like Montana and we're doing this training, and something happens and we need these bandages and we only have a couple that are sterile and we have all of these, then yeah, if it's truly a matter of life or death, I would use this. But other than that, please always use sterile equipment. You really don't want to get someone infected with any germs or anything. So that's because, like I said, sepsis, that systemic infection, that'll kill you just as dead. And it's really not a fun way to go.
Yeah. Well, obviously, like if they're used repeatedly, but like I'm thinking about like if somebody bought one for the first time and they want to just like do a let me try it, like go through the process of it just to have done it once on themselves or whatever it might be. Would that still be safe to then put in their kit, or should there just be like tourniquets, like you have the one that you've practiced with and the one that you actually keep with you?
Okay. I'm sorry, I over-explain a lot, but
No, it's good.
yeah. In that case, even still, I'd really say just have one you practice with, because if it's exposed to the air, obviously, then you have wear and tear, like we were talking with tourniquets. But if it's sealed in its pack, it's pretty much safe there and pretty much not good indefinitely, but good for a really long time. And I just sort of bite the bullet, no pun intended, and just buy two, have one you can practice with, because then you can practice with it always. You can always use it. I've had this one for like 2 years now, and I still use it. Um, and then have one designated for your kit. Um, that's what I would recommend personally.
And ballpark, what does compression bandage like this cost?
You're looking, I want to say between 20 and 30. 20 or 30 or so.
Okay.
Yeah. So you see, like IFACs, I think like Gorilla Tactical sells a IFAC kit that has a tourniquet, gauze, all that good stuff. I think for like 80, $90. And that's a really good way to just have all of your kit together. And it's priced pretty fairly, I think. But you can also buy your different kits, different piecemeals. Like Rescue Essentials has all this stuff. I can look up pricing real quick if you'd like.
Yeah, I was just kind of giving folks some ballpark figure if they've never really thought about this stuff.
Gotcha. Would you use a compression like this on a head wound? Absolutely. Uh, if someone has like a superficial wound, like a big cut, on their head or whatnot, and so long as they don't have a bunch of gray matter pouring out, I would definitely say use one of these, and I can show you on someone. I'm absolutely sleeping on the couch tonight. So have you over here? So sure. So sort of same concept as before, keeping this sterile. So we're going to find out where our wound is. Let's say it's right here. I'm going to place my bandage there. And we're going to do the same thing we've been doing, so I'm not going to go all the way through it, but we have direct pressure. I'm going to cinch this down, and so long as I know that the skull isn't fractured, I don't feel anything loose there. It's not, I don't have globs of gray matter in my hand. That's there. We'll get this tightened down pretty tight, enough to stop the bleeding. But obviously we're not trying to treat this as a tourniquet. So you can do that there. With I'm gonna. Would you mind taking off this?
Oh, yeah.
With neck wounds, because not every neck wound is instant fatality or whatever they say in Mortal Kombat. Let's say if you have a wound here, what you can do is you have your bandage that you put on, and actually I'll use this one's a little bit larger, more. I think this one's actually more of your like abdominal wrap. Not that they're marketed that way, it's just a larger pad. So I'm going to use one with a slightly smaller one because we don't want to constrict the airway. So we go here. So we have our compression on, right? And we know that their spine is still intact, right? We don't feel it jostling around like loose change or like bone on bone. So we're not going to do this because that'll kill them. We're going to go under their arm and back around up here. And, obviously pull it tight, keep everything nice, and just wrap under there so that we still have compression, right? We still have, the forces that be, that direct pressure going down on the wound, but we're not cutting off airway. We're not putting a bunch of stuff around the neck where it could, suffocate them or cut off blood flow to the other side, the unaffected side. Any questions, or does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Great demonstration.
Cool. And that's the short and long of compression bandages. Does anyone have any questions or general questions about like first aid, wound care, things of that sort before we get into the next one? Andy, if we have time for another one.
Yeah, we are here as long as you want.
All right.
Buckle in for 8 hours. Let's do it.
You've been what for 8 hours?
I said, let's buckle in for 8 hours.
Buckle in for 8. All right. So, I mean, with enough caffeine and, enough caffeine, all things are possible. No, we're not going to talk for 8 hours. I don't want to, scare off your audience. I'm going to drink a little bit of tea, though. All right. So, questions, anyone? Anything we've gone over? Anything that you want to go over? How about crazy glue for large blunt head injury before the compression wrap? If it's a blunt injury, I reckon that you're not going to have sort of your external bleeding. Um, and if you don't have that bleeding, I really wouldn't use a compression bandage on a head wound. And I really wouldn't use I wouldn't use this or crazy glue, even if it was an open fracture on a head. I'm not putting any glue near their skull because I have a medical director, a doctor in a hospital that's either going to fire me, take away my certifications, or come at me with a scalpel. So yeah. We're really going over just the most basics. Here's how you use these wraps, tourniquets, and things of that ilk right now. So yeah, where are you from? I'll say I'm from Ohio. I don't want to get into too many specifics, but I'm from Ohio, and I've been in EMS for a couple years now. Um, More experience prior to that was with media safety and sort of stop the bleed trainings, and I've been a medic for a few months now. So, like I said, I'm not the end all be all by any means. I mean, I know what I know, and I'm willing to share anything I know. But I definitely don't want to try and come across as like a leading expert in anything. We're going over very basic things here. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's pretty thorough. So what are the other alternatives, things that we can use that, again, kind of like with a tourniquet, are there things that we can use if we don't have access to like a compression bandage?
Yeah, absolutely. So I sort of alluded to this earlier. Compression bandage is essentially just a big gauze pad with an ace wrap bandage around it. So let's say you're in a situation and you don't have one of these, or you have your sort of what I would call your boo-boo kit, which is your general bandages, gauze pads, your wraps for like your like if you twist your ankle, things of that sort. You can absolutely improvise a compression bandage. And the reason why I say that is because if you're using a compression bandage, then they're not bleeding so profusely and so badly that in minutes they're going to die. That's really when we're going to use this. So if you have, like I said, that T-post that wanted to exact revenge, and cut across here pretty good, and it's bleeding. It's bleeding pretty steady, but a big piece of gauze, like I get my big piece of gauze, and I put my ace bandage around that. That's essentially doing the same thing. It's just better to have these, in my opinion, for general use. Sorry, not general use, for these situations, because everything's already there. They're tried and true. They have things like these, like this one has this thing that you actually feed into and is going to sort of put that over top of the wound and really enhance the pressure that you're able to get with it. And I think somebody mentioned in the chat earlier that sometimes these bandages are similar to these bandages, which are covered in a hemostatic agent, which is going to enhance clotting, blood clotting at the wound site, and help ensure that the bleeding stops a lot more effectively, as opposed to just gauze and an ace wrap. But you can use that if you really, really need to. Tim mentioned not pushing entrails back in. So yeah, I mentioned not pushing entrails back in. So essentially what you want to do is, as respectfully as possible, if someone's guts are hanging out, obviously hopefully they're laying down, they're not just standing up with them hanging out. Lay them down, and get them in that safe area. And you're essentially just going to make sure they're sitting on top of, let me stand up. So let's say get a big old wound across here, they spill out. They're sitting on top of here. They're sort of all collected. And I put my big gauze pad across that, right? And I'm putting my combat, bandage around that as well to keep everything sealed up and in place and keep it nice and nice. The reason why you don't want to push them in is because you don't want to, perforate or tear anything. You don't want to tangle anything, more so than it may already be. Because if someone's guts are hanging out, they're already in a pretty bad way, and that trauma team's going to have a heck of a day with them already. And we don't want to compound that injury anymore, and we don't want to make the situation any worse for that patient now or down the road. Because your guts are full of bacteria, and if that spills out into what we call like your pericardia, your abdominal cavity, uh, sepsis, which is not fun, and all of that. So that's sort of what you would do with with
Makes sense.
cool. Basically a sports bra for the gut. Yeah, actually, you don't even need to go to like Rescue Essentials. If you just go to Third Love and use discount code Andy and Carter for 15% off, you can just get a sports bra and just put that on them.
Absolutely. This 100% works.
Yep. Buy now on your phones.
Yeah.
That's compression bandages. Any other questions? Also, for those that are in the chat, Lane has some really good points that they're bringing up too. Yeah, that's compression bandages. Any questions about those?
You're doing great. Covering it
Cool.
very thoroughly.
All right. How do you notice internal bleeding? A few different ways. Internal bleeding. Someone is going to present what we say really shocky, really pale, really sweaty. They're going to kind of be out of it, sort of maybe not know where they are, know who they are, what's going on around them. So disoriented. Where the bleeding's coming from, we always say with like the gut. Eventually you're going to see some really, really bad bruising, some really dark, gnarly bruising around the area. And that's a pretty late sign. For just general noticing internal bleeding. For our sake that we're discussing here, if you have someone that you think might have internal bleeding and you need to let medical personnel know, those are some of the signs to look for. Also, unfortunately, bombs are a thing, shelling's a thing. If someone suffers like a blast injury and there's like the massive force against them, or they have stuff thrown at them, and that's sort of those blunt injuries, that can rupture organs, and some organs carry a lot of blood, like your spleen. That's that's going to be bad, and you can let someone know, like, hey, this person was here when this happened, and now they're acting like this. That can let medical personnel know that there's something pretty funkadelic going on. Eye injury. If something's in someone's eye, leave it there. Don't try and pull anything out. Actually, just generally speaking, never, ever, ever, ever pull anything out of anyone if it's there. The only two times you would do that are if, like, let's say there's a big old, like, piece of something that went through someone's cheek and out the other side, and they're having trouble breathing because of it, then medical personnel will take that out. Or if it's in the way of performing CPR. So if somebody has a knife through their back or through their chest, I need to do compressions, I'll take it out. But beyond that, and especially for everyone in chat, if you're not a medically trained personnel, please don't pull anything out of anyone. Leave it in place. Leave it stable if you can. I'll talk without eye injuries. But please, for the love of God, don't pull anything out of anyone.
I can't believe The Walking Dead lied to me. What else is TV lying to me about?
Next thing you're going to tell me is that sheriff show that was on CBS didn't accurately portray the LASD.
Come on. You can't do this to me.
Anyway, so eye injuries. Like bad TV is an eye injury.
Yeah.
Y'all didn't come here for stand-up. It's stand-up you're getting. So if somebody has an injury there, all the dad jokes. If somebody has
2 puppies and now you're just nonstop.
Yeah, I'm a dog father, honestly, and I'm here for my dog children. Yeah, actually, hopefully, the next couple months, taking a canine casualty care, like first aid and all this stuff for dogs. So that'd be cool to talk about eventually. But
Sure people would want to hear about it.
yeah, but with eye injuries, if something's in there, leave it. What you can do is really leave it, really try and get them to a medically trained person. Um, because some of the most critical injuries we say are injuries to life and limb, and that's considered like a life and limb injury. Eye popped out situation, Jesus Christ. Leave it. Don't
You're
mess
getting
with it.
put through the ringer.
Just don't touch it. Um, it don't mess with it. Just say, "Hey, I'm sorry your eye popped out," and get them to a paramedic, or if there's no paramedics, get them to at least one medic. No, but eye popped out situation. Oh God, I don't leave it uh, stable. I guess try not to jostle them around too much. Don't try and put it back in. For the love of God, don't put it back in. And just try and make sure it doesn't snap off. Don't make them go jogging or play ping pong with it.
Uh,
Yeah,
yeah.
someone in the organ outside, just leave it. I'm not. I heard shrapnel bolts are often left in a patient after surgery. Can lead not cause trouble in bloodstream. Tim, that is above my pay grade. I don't have a good answer for that, and I don't want to give you any wrong information. Um, it's definitely something to look into for sure. But I don't want to give you any bad information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll have a doctor on next.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Get Andrew Fisher, trauma doctor. I learned a lot of the stuff I know from his posts and his articles. Um, but if we're good on compression bandages and eyes popping out, and I'm not trying to make fun of you. That's good questions. I just wasn't expecting that. We can talk about a little bit of packing a wound if that's all right with y'all.
I would love to.
All right, and I'm still good on time before I go into work, so I'm gonna grab one of my dummies, and I'll show you how to pack a wound.
And while he's up, a reminder, folks, if you want to throw Carter a couple bucks for taking the time to do this with us, hit us up on Venmo at Poor Pro's Almanac, and I will get it over to him.
And super appreciated folks doing that. Also, I know there's some really good orgs. I think North American Rescue is currently taking donations for folks that want to help make IFACs for folks in Ukraine, dealing with stuff over there. So if you look into that, those orgs are out there that are doing that work as well. Not to distract or take away from what Andy's doing, which I really appreciate it. But there's those things as well. Yeah, just give money to both. Give us all your money.
Unlimited money. Just keep passing it out.
This is the Rich Bourgeois Chronicle, I think is the name of the show, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Can't you tell by our fancy lighting and our colorful walls?
Yeah. So this is a dummy I made out of memory foam, and it looks terrible. But the Stop the Bleed dummy, which does the same thing, costs like $900. So
we're not as
memory
bourgeois as you say.
Exactly. You in chat calling us petite bourgeois.
Let me
Anyway.
give an answer to that Cash App. Hold on. You can keep going.
So wound packing. If you have an injury that's essentially in the pocket of the groin, where you can't get a tourniquet, because essentially a tourniquet only goes so far up on a leg. And the dogs are stealing my gauze. If you go high enough up, you can't get a tourniquet on there. And you can still bleed out, you can still die. Actually, one of the people that got me into this is Tim Hetherington, famous journalist, British journalist, was killed in Libya in 2011 when a mortar struck him and another journalist I really admired, Chris Hondros. Tim bled out from his injury. It was so high up on his leg that a tourniquet couldn't have saved his life, and they didn't have the resources or knowledge or skills to pack the wound, and he ended up bleeding out shortly after. So, everything we're talking about, the reason why we know this stuff is because someone has, died as a result of injuries. And there have been numerous medical folks who have tried to figure out a way to keep that from happening. So, packing a wound, that was sort of my inspiration for getting into this, and wound packing. Let's say someone has a shrapnel wound or their combine went out for vengeance and they have a puncture wound somewhere, like in the buttocks, back of the leg, or in that sort of, you have your V of your groin up in this area, packing a wound. So there's a specific type of gauze you want to use. Stop the Bleed has these t-shirts that say this t-shirt can save a life, and you can pack that wound into a t-shirt and it's going to save their life. And I don't like that just because putting a t-shirt in someone sounds not good.
I'm gonna take these out.
And the
Not
puppies are
quite
going to make
sanitary. No.
yeah, not quite sanitary. Puppies, do you want to say goodbye to
Oh, yeah.
chat?
Do you want to say goodbye to puppies? So there's
Goodbye,
2 minutes.
puppies.
2 minutes.
Sorry, puppies distracted me. We're talking about wound packing, t-shirts. Don't put a t-shirt in someone. Obviously, if it's all you have to pack a wound, then that's all you have, but you really shouldn't, because we're all cool, hip folks here who are going to have awesome IFACs after this training. With combat gauze, that's what this is called. Combat gauze Quick Clot is the brand name, and this is another instance because this has actual stuff on it. Celux, is that what it's called? Shellfish extract that enhances your clotting factor and is going to cause the wound to clot and stop the bleeding much more effectively, especially with deep wounds, like deep in your leg that you need to, pack in. Has that on it. So definitely brand name with that same, sort of in line with tourniquets. But how do you use it? Great question, Andy.
Can read my mind.
I'm with you, bud. I'm here for you. So let's say we have a wound like this. Turn the lighting down so it's not so bright. With my Twin Peaks log lady dummy here, a wound like this, you have your entry. It's pretty deep down in there. Can't get a tourniquet on because the where it's at on the body. Can use Quick Clot on someone with shellfish allergy? I'm not sure. I've wondered about that, and I should have Googled it before I got here. I think the extract that they take out is the part that, it's from the shell. It's not the shellfish itself. It's from, the shell. So I don't think it would. Maybe. If you have a shellfish allergy, Google it. Sorry. I should know that. I apologize.
I feel like
Not
if
all
it were, that would be part of the questioning when you see somebody with a wound.
Yeah, I've never been told that it causes an allergic reaction by anyone who's trained me in any of the readings I've ever done. I haven't seen anything that says that. That doesn't mean that it doesn't. That just means that in all of the stuff I've done, I haven't seen that be an issue that people have come across. But wound packing. So we have our wound here. And essentially what you want to do is you get your gauze in your gloved hand. And I know that this is all strung out. That's because this has been used forever. You want to keep it as sterile as possible. It's going to come looking like a deck of cards about that big. So you're going to grab the end of your deck of cards, essentially. You're going to keep the rest of that stable and sterile, either sort of on top of the packaging, lay your packaging out on top of the patient, or have it in your hand. And, as we're feeding through, you just let more out. But keep it as clean as possible because, while these bandages are going on top, they're going inside the patient. So you really want this to be clean, as possible. So we have our wound. We've identified this wound. We need to pack it full of gauze. So we're putting pressure around here, right? So we have our wound and have this in our hand like this. We have our thumb and our index index finger. So we're going to push with our thumb as deep as possible, get more gauze with our index finger, push back down in, and keep doing this till you run out of gauze. And then what you're doing when you run out of gauze is you grab even more gauze. So you're going to pack this full, as full as possible. I know I'm sort of doing like a rough job here, but you really want to pack that in and really push down in that wound, because you need that gauze with that additive. Or even if it doesn't have an additive, just need that gauze to get down in there to try and, put pressure on and stop that bleeding. Essentially have this big hole in someone they need to fill with gauze to try and keep it from, keep them from bleeding out. Especially if something major is hit, like your femoral, you really need to pack that in quick, fast, and quick and fast. Quick and tight. So for the sake of demonstration, let's say that this is fully packed in. So we have it packed to here. I believe, and it probably shows here. Let me see. Yeah, says that you need to hold pressure on there for 3 minutes. So keeping 3 minutes of pressure on that wound. Sort of pressing down on that, keeping it packed in for about 3 minutes to really make sure that everything gets soaked in and everything stops bleeding. And then what you can do to ensure that everything stays in place, nothing gets pulled out, and Jimmy jumped, you got it. We're going to put a combat bandage over top. So we have our wrap that we kept sanitary. Got our gauze pad. It's going to go over top. Now we're going to wrap around, tighten down, and all of that good stuff. Now let's say you have more of a superficial laceration that's bleeding pretty bad. What you can do is I'm going to make a makeshift deck of cards here. Pretend this looks uniform, clean, and never used. And I have a big laceration. Oh, look, a big laceration. So let's say it's this big. What I can do is I have my deck of cards here. In/on the wound, right? Placed proper, pressure, right? Holding that tight. 3 minutes. Oop. Gauze, right? And that is the long story short on wound packing. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay.
I'm good.
Cool. Man, short and long wound packing. Really good videos out there. The resuscitationist, like I said on Instagram, posts a lot of really good trauma stuff. No packing abdominal or chest wounds, right? Yeah, don't pack abdominal wounds and don't pack chest wounds. Chest wounds need a thing called a chest seal, which, I mean, Andy, if you wanted to, we could get into those. I have a couple of training ones if you'd want to see them.
I mean, I will not say no, but I know you said you've got work, so I don't want to tie you up too long.
I mean, I still have time if folks want to.
Yeah, if you want to do it quick.
Yeah, absolutely. So chest wounds, chest seals, all that good stuff. Chest seal is what I'm going to grab. So some are vented, some are not vented. This is our training one, which has been used a lot. So we have a chest seal, the card on how much you see. Huh. That's cool. Chest seal is going to come out looking like this. This type of packaging, if this is the brand you go with. I have a couple of SAM chest seals, SAM brand chest seals. in my kit that are pretty good. Thankfully, I've never had to use them. But they're a pretty solid brand, and pretty solid product. And not sponsored, but you have this, and you can see there's vents on either side of it there, and it has a really sticky side and a smooth side. A little hole there you can see, sort of in the middle. It's not an actual hole; it's just where there's no adhesive. And so the reasons for that, the components of your chest seal, are there for a reason. Now those reasons we'll tell you after this ad break. For splints. No, I just needed to collect my thoughts for a second. So with chest seals, the reason we're putting them on the chest is because you have two things in here called lungs. They are big, can hold a lot of blood. Actually, the space where your lungs sit, your pleural space, can hold all of the blood in your body. And so if you get a wound there that's bleeding out really bad, it can end very bad, very quick. But that's not exactly the way you put a chest seal on. You put a chest seal on for a thing called a pneumothorax, to keep it from devolving into a tension pneumothorax. So what that is, it's when you have penetrating trauma to your chest, and that causes air to get sucked into that space. And as air fills that space in your chest, your pleural space, it's going to put pressure on that lung. And as more air gets in, as you breathe in more air, and puts more air in there, it's going to compress that lung. It's going to collapse that lung. And then it's going to put pressure on your heart and on your veins that return to your heart and on your artery, your aorta. And it's going to keep you from being able to get air in. And it's going to put so much compression or tamponade on there that you're not going to be able to pump any blood. Your heart's not going to be able to pump, and you're going to die. So, medical personnel, could do a thing to relieve that pressure, but none of us are, and I'm not even going to bring it up. But what we can do to keep it from getting to a tension pneumothorax, is a chest seal. So what this does, we have our adhesive area, is that's going to slap on to their chest, and it's going to create a real nice seal so that air can't get into the wound. And if air can't get into the wound from the outside world, then you're going to be pretty well set. But what about the air that's already in there, Carter? Well, chat, I don't know why I'm scorning you, but bear with it. Chat, that's why we have these vents on them. So these vents are going to allow air to escape, but air can't get sucked back in. That's why you hear a phrase called a sucking chest wound. How you're going to be able to tell if it's a sucking chest wound is if there's blood burbling outside the wound. You see little bubbles. If someone has penetrating trauma to the chest and they're having a really hard time breathing, those are two indications that they're have sucking chest wound, that they are getting that sort of tension pneumothorax or that pneumothorax, and need to get a chest seal pretty ASAP. Super good rule of thumb is everyone all together now, feel on your rib cage. So you have your ribs, right? Feel up to the point right here. You have your sternum, sort of follow that down to that point there. That is your xiphoid process, sort of the end of everything there. Yeah, good point, Lane. It actually, you can't hear it if you're down there listening. It sounds like the ocean. That's not true. It sounds like it's sucking, and you really need to get one of these on. But xiphoid process, everyone felt that. Everyone knows what that is. That line all the way around you. So that sort of midpoint here, and then all the way around your side, all the way around your back, all the way up to your neck. Any wounds, front, side, back, you're going to put a chest seal on. The reason why we're doing that on all of those wounds is because if you have entry or exit wounds there, you need to make sure you get them sealed off from the outside world. You need the blood and lungs and all that good stuff to stay put, stay expanding, and stay flowing. So chest seal on the front, chest seal on the back. if it's in and out. If there's multiple wounds, uh, multiple chest seals. Uh, Good rule of thumb is if, I hope I don't butcher this quote, if it's larger than a pencil, it needs a chest seal. The reason being, if it's smaller than that, if it's like a little like pinprick essentially, it um, won't suck in air, right? The vacuum, the seal that's in your pleural cavity or pleural space in the outside world, it doesn't work. But if it's larger than that, then air can get in, and the vacuum that's in your body, the negative pressure, the positive pressure gets all messed up, and you get a tension pneumothorax, and you die. But we're going to keep that from happening by using these bad boys. High fin vent is this brand. They come in a twin pack. And as you can see, this is our training one. So, yeah, that's short and long of chest seals. Really super important to get them placed. And if they're not vented, like if they don't have the vents like this one does, like you saw those little fins on there, what you can do is crack one side of it to let air escape. So, like anyone who has ever been in EMS, you get this test question all the time. Oh, you put on a chest seal. Are you going to seal all 4 sides or only 3 sides? And the answer is to seal 3 sides so that air can still escape. But you have your seal on there, so air can't get back in. If that makes sense to everyone. So
yeah, I think it makes sense.
Just buy one with a vent. You don't have to worry about it. If you don't, 3 sides down, 1 little side up.
Is there any purpose to buy a non-vented chest seal?
Cheaper. So if someone has a bleeding wound that is causing a pneumothorax from a stab wound. Tim, good question. I've always found with patients, and again, the amount of I haven't had too many trauma patients, which is thankfully, but with all the trainings I've done, you always put your patient flat, unless it's going to affect their airway or unless they're obtunded and they can't protect their own airway, in which case you sort of, or they're sort of passed out, you leave them on their side so they don't choke on their tongue. For our sakes, if someone's passing out, put them on their left side, head on their arm, and legs sort of at an angle, called the left lateral recumbent, just to keep them from choking on their vomit and blood and things of that sort. If blood's going to fill up the lung, it's going to kind of fill up the lung, either one side or the other. So yeah, there's that aspect of it. I hope that answered your question. Leave your patient on their side if they're unconscious and can't protect their own airway, which means they can't really breathe on their own, or they're passed out. If they're passed out or they can't really protect their own airway, put them left lateral recumbent on their side like this, so that anything that comes up is gonna drool out. When you took slap lead last summer, paramedics said chest seals require EMT knowledge. I'm checking this for a reason. So with most things that require medical knowledge, it's going to have an RX on it. And I'm not seeing an RX on this. And as I understand it, anyone can really buy a chest seal and anyone could really use it. Now, I highly, highly, highly recommend never using one without proper training, and I wouldn't consider this proper training. This is just an overview of all the fun ways you can stop bleeding. Still do an in-person stop the bleed class. Still go and get your certificate in it. Get your Red Cross first aid, all that stuff. Make sure you know what you're doing before you would go and buy something or go and use it. This is just an overview. and things of that ilk. But as far as I understand it, anyone can buy a chest seal and anyone can use it. I mean, whether they use it properly or not is a different story. Um, but yeah, I always, whenever I teach folks, I mean, if you're going to be packing a wound and filling a hole full of gauze, I think you can put on a piece of sticky tape on a chest wound. That's a
Yeah, you can definitely buy them. I know that.
um, and I'm not liable for any misgivings or any mistreatment given to anyone based off this training. That's my quick you can't sue me and please don't thing. Obviously, we're just discussing aspects of Stop the Bleed. This is not a Stop the Bleed class. I'm not a certified instructor. This is just, friendly conversation between Chat, Andy, and me. Does that make sense?
Yes. And Lowry's.
Lowry's?
Lowry's Salt. Our sponsor.
Oh,
Yeah. So anything else you wanted to cover before we wrap this up?
I think that just about covers it. That's tourniquets, bandage, packaging, quick little thing on chest seals. Again, don't use them unless you're properly trained. Tourniquets, bandages, obviously that's a different story. This, don't use unless you're properly trained. And this is not hashtag proper training. Can the chest be bloody? Prevent a six-sided stick? I mean, clean it off. If there's a lot of blood, wipe it and then place it. If you use the chest seal without understanding the extent of the trauma, it can cause more damage than helped. Okay, yeah. So, if you don't know the extent of injuries that someone's undergoing, using a chest seal could make things worse. That's why when I mentioned there's a cool little trick that like medics, nurse, doctors can use to relieve pressure in the chest cavity. That's as far as I'm getting on that, because that is something that you need to be either licensed or certified in to do. You have to do a whole bunch of training, and we're not getting into any of that. Chest seals should only be used if you know for certain that that is what's going to keep this person from dying. You enter their injuries, everything that's going on with them, and you know that chest seal is indicated. So while we went over them, I do not encourage you to use them unless you have a background in medical, emergency medical care, and understand everything that's going on.
Or you don't want them to die and you're in the middle of the woods alone and there's no other option. That might be a good time.
Yeah, that too. If you are the only person out in the middle of nowhere with you and your buddy, and they have an injury that's indicated or that indicates use of this, that's a different situation. But outside of that,
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, thanks so much, Carter. This has been really interesting. I know a hell of a lot more than when we started. I'm sure a bunch of other people also do. I've already seen a couple folks tossing a couple bucks over, so people have definitely appreciated what the time you've put into helping folks out. So that's really cool. And yeah, if there's anyone has any other last questions, I'll just plug some other stuff. Unless you want to plug something first.
Attend an in-person Stop the Bleed class. Go to, I think, stopthebleed.com. They have, events that are coming up, things of that ilk. If you're really interested, EMT school is a little pricey, but it's well worth it. And just, follow best practices. We don't want anyone to get hurt, but unfortunately people do. And if you have the training and know-how and the equipment to safely and effectively help someone, well, then you should. And I really appreciate everyone who's been interacting and everyone who came to this today. I'm honored to be able to offer a little bit of knowledge and hopefully encourage you to pursue more. So thank you.
Yeah. I'll also plug Coursera often has like a 7-day free trial. So they have paramedic classes, like basically test prep type stuff. And I did one with the paramedic one. I didn't finish it. I got about halfway through within 7 days. I tried to like power through an entire term's class as fast as I could while it was free. So I've got a bunch of notes that don't mean much to me anymore, but that is a resource that's out there. If you're thinking about it, you want to see how intense it is, and maybe just get a little bit more evidence based science to justify some of the stuff that we've topically covered. That's one way to get some free education as well. So I'm gonna kick you off the screen so I can take over and wrap the sucker up. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. I sure did. I wanted to follow up and say that Saturday we're going to have a IFAC building 101, so you can figure out how to build your own individual first aid kit. Which obviously, if you've watched this, you're going to want to know a little bit more of what else should be in there, and talk about some of the more peripheral materials that you might want to have in a kit. So that might be of interest to you. If you enjoyed this, please, if you are watching on Twitch, you can hop on, subscribe to us with like the Amazon. It throws us a couple bucks, which is pretty cool. If not, and you want to support us, we have our Patreon and our Venmo. If you are interested in Patreon, it gives you early access to all of our podcast episodes. If you don't know at this point, we are a podcast. Come check it out. We're 80 episodes deep. We have a new one coming out on Sunday on the Dayak food forest. So if that's of interest to you, definitely come check it out, because it's up there right now and it'll come out on Sunday night. Yeah, we've got a ton of stuff coming up on Twitch. So I definitely think if you enjoyed this, you should definitely subscribe, or follow. I know the link terminology is a little different. If you're on YouTube, which I see at least 5 of you are, please subscribe over there if you don't already, and you'll get notifications when we go live, which is great. If you're on Facebook, hop over to YouTube or Twitch and subscribe there so you can watch, although obviously you can still watch it on Facebook. So that's about it, guys. This has been fantastic. Thanks so much. And I'm sure we will see you all around again.